Can we please stop calling this group of people a curse? Recently, I watched the interview entitled Exposing the True Horrors of Sororities and Fraternities with Melissa Blair on the We Need to Talk YouTube channel. So me being non-Greek, I was just curious because I had been hearing stories recently about people denouncing from their Greek organizations, and then there's arguments as to why people would stay. So I was just pretty curious about it, and I watched. So I was overall pleased with how clearly Melissa presented her case regarding her experiences in her particular sorority. However, it grieved my spirit when she said this particular part. She specifically says this: "May the fear of the Lord grip us, because judgment has entered. God is judging these organizations, and I'm telling you right now, I don't care if it ain't happened to your mama, your grandmama, whoever it says these sins, I will follow to the third and fourth generation." And that's why a lot of people that are in these organizations, your children are dealing with autism. I'm going to pause it right there. So there are some other things that she said, and I'm going to skip on down. And she said, that one, you brought curses upon your bloodline. And in the same way you took it out on God's child, He's taking it out on yours. Okay. So I had an issue there because I felt the statement was made out of complete ignorance when it comes to the autism population. As you can see, I might know a little bit about autism. I do not have autism, but I am a speech language pathologist, and I've worked with autistic children as early as the year 2017 when I was in clinicals for my speech therapy master's degree program. And so as a speech pathologist in the field since January 2026, I've been working with this population for 6 years now. So I may, you might think I might have a little bit of experience working with this population. One thing I can definitely say is this population is not a curse, and I wish we would stop saying that. And given that this particular interview, the views have grown to over 700,000 views at this point, and I know last time I recall there were over 7,000 comments. I left a comment. I'm not going to replay all, state my comment, go back to the video and find that comment. But there were over 7,000 comments on that video. It seemed like when I looked at it last time, a lot of people were in agreement with what she was saying, though I did notice some people here and there were taking issue with the autism part, and they were saying something along the lines of she was wrong for talking about autism in that way, which I 100% agree with that. So I can have a viewpoint that I appreciate how she presented herself and explained her case about how she didn't think being in her sorority any longer was a good idea for her. And I can also think that she did not do a good job when talking about the autistic population. So my view is not that she should have come out and, supported the autistic population if she didn't know anything about it. I would have much rather her to have left them out the conversation altogether, because that statement was spoken out of complete ignorance. Because I know what I see when I work with autistic kids. And one thing I want to know is that the words that we speak, like Proverbs 18:20, I'm sorry, I'm saying this correctly, 18:21 says, death and life is in the power of the tongue. And also based on, I've been doing this 40-day challenge called Zip It by Karen Eman. You can find that on Amazon. It is a great 40-day challenge if you're trying to help temper your tongue. She starts off her verse from day 18, which I read on yesterday. Gracious words are a honeycomb, sweet to the soul and healing to the bones. And I thought it was interesting that she also said this other thing. Take the advice I sometimes have to give myself. Don't say something permanently painful just because you are temporarily ticked off. Because that was, you could see in the interview, Melissa was very passionate. And so there was some frustration there, which I get there's frustration. But I 100% agree with Miss Eman as well, what she said here. Permanent painful, saying something permanently painful just because you're ticked off. Miss Eman goes on to say, all the humans you encounter throughout the course of the day are quote unquote on purpose people. God plopped them into your life for a reason. These souls, whether they are of the easy-to-live variety or the scratchy sandpaper kind, and I'm going to add here, or are autistic, can be used by God to mold, reshape, and sometimes stretch our souls as He perpetually crafts us into creations becoming more and more like His Son. So with that in mind, I would like to talk a bit more about why it is so harmful and painful to talk about populations that we have no clue about. And it's clear that Miss Blair here was not aware and fairly ignorant to the autism population. That was why she spoke the way she did. And when I say ignorance here, I want to be very clear. Ignorance does not mean stupidity. Ignorance means a lack of knowledge or a lack of awareness. Some people get those confused. They hear ignorant and think, oh, she's insulting. She's calling her stupid. Where do you see me saying that? And where does the dictionary say that? Ignorance means a lack of awareness, a lack of knowledge. So I want to provide education here. And I would love if Miss Blair is watching this to consider a retraction on that statement, which was spoken, I want to say in a fit of passion, but out of ignorance. And before we go any further, I want to address this because I know this has been coming up in news recently, the whole situation about Tylenol and the connection to autism, which I have not found any research to establish that is true. One thing I want to point out is autism was officially coined for the first time back in 1944. Anyone want to guess when when Tylenol was sold over the counter for the first time? 1960. So you do the math on that. Is that not 16 years later after autism was officially coined for the first time? So that argument already don't add up. So if we're going and looking at autism based off of use of Tylenol, we've got to stop, y'all. Mind you, I'm doing research. I'm looking online. All the stuff I'm presenting to you today, this is all research. This is research that you have access to. And all the research I've done, I'm going to put all the links in the description of this video. So feel free to look at all the research I'm going to put in the description, okay? But I want to make it very clear, hey, autism is not what you think it is. Okay, so one thing about autism that we don't know about, it is more likely that you have met someone with autism and did not know it. Did you ever consider that? It is said by autismspeaks.org that 1 in 31 children, autistic children, there are every 31 children, one is an autistic child, right? And for every 45 adults, one is an autistic adult. Have you ever been around just a group of adults before and found yourself surprised? I don't know how many of you all have had this experience, but I've been in this experience before and met adults and who later on would say, oh, but I'm autistic. And I was like, oh, I didn't know that. All right, because we're having a conversation and I'm not detecting anything. Typically they're more, when it's more obvious, they have more social challenges, like social cues and things like that is a bit off. So, but there are some that you'll talk to them, and just like I'm talking to you, and the social cues seem, hey, just about like everyone else's social cues. And then you find out that person's autistic. So it's more than likely that you run into autistic people and didn't know they was autistic. So considering that, we shouldn't want to put them in the category of a curse. You get what I'm saying here? On top of that, it is said, and this is going to be a very interesting fact, also by autismspeaks.org, there are 4 subtypes of autism. I want you to listen to this. The largest ones are considered social and behavioral challenges. And so children in this group show core autism traits like social difficulties and repetitive behaviors, but each developmental milestone like walking and talking on time. Okay, so what I know is a key thing here, though they have the social difficulties, repetitive behaviors, and repetitive behaviors means they may repeat what you say, or they'll say the same thing maybe repeatedly 5 times in a row. It varies for every child, right? And sometimes it's physical things they may do, like flapping their hands. It depends on every child. Every child is different. Okay, but notice here they said walking and talking on time, they typically, they reach these milestones, right? Pretty much on time. Okay, in this group, they are more likely to have co-occurring conditions such as ADHD, anxiety, depression, or OCD. Now, this is where people are going to come in and say, oh my goodness. Have you ever met somebody with ADHD before who didn't have autism? How about anxiety? Depression, OCD. Okay, I know previously, historically, I've been diagnosed with situational depression depression, not once but 2 times. And each of those times, it is based on the situation I'm in and that high stress situation I'm in. And it wasn't something like, oh, I was taking tests in my college and then I got so stressed that I got depressed. No, it was more like when those cases happened, I was dealing with abuse. I was being abused. All right. And I had already been clear before in some earlier videos that I had come out of an abusive marriage, 3-year marriage. Okay. This population of people, they make up 37%. Again, these people are reaching milestones, so they're quote unquote normal in that sense. Social challenges, difficulties. Sometimes they just have a hard time. Know the exact things to say in a social situation. I don't see how that's cursed behavior, demonic behavior. You ever been in a situation and know quite what to say? I'm kind of trying to understand. And did you know with therapy, for instance, a lot of these behaviors can be altered and helped and improved over time. I know it because I help these kids do this through my speech therapy work. And I have seen improvement, like massive improvement. And I can show you a few examples. For instance, Kay, he is on the left here. He is interacting with my other little kiddo who I bring in, who's considered a typically developing child. And we're reading a book together. Dinos love celebrating Valentine's Day with boxes of candy and flower bouquets. Let's see. What's he eating?
Yes.
What's he eating?
Chocolate.
Good. You said chocolate.
Chocolate.
Good. Say chocolate.
Chocolate.
Now, Kay, when I first met him about 2.5 years ago, he was 2 and he was not talking at all. I became a speech therapist after he turned 3. And we, a little bit at a time, started, getting some words out of him. Now at this point, we're working on complete sentences. So you're noticing here, Kay is actually producing some complete sentences. Yeah. And sharing the love of somebody sweet.
Yeah.
Okay, wait a minute. We're going to put it back on in a minute. Okay, we finish this. We'll do. Which is pretty awesome, right? Pretty awesome. Kay is also highly intelligent. And Kay is 4. Also highly intelligent is C right here. C is 6 years old.
Stairs.
Okay. What's one of them called?
Stairs. Upstairs.
Upstairs. One of them is called a stair.
Stair.
Or this.
Or this.
Okay.
S-T-E-P. Step.
Okay. Spell it again for me.
S-E-T-E-P. Step.
Okay. Spell it one more time.
S-T-E-P.
Step. Awesome job. Really good. C came to me with very highly repetitive behaviors. And when I say highly repetitive, he literally repeat every question you asked him. What's that? He would say, what's that? And I say, look at this. What's that? He would say, look at this. What's that? Well, based on this video, C is not doing that anymore. Okay? This is all related to intervention. He can be a little bit more hyper anxious at times, right? But also he has reduced in that behavior also. I think what I'm noticing is the more he learns he can get something done, he can achieve something, he excels and he gets better. He calms himself down, which is great. So Kay has some anxiousness as well. You don't see it in this video. In the video I just showed you earlier, but Kay has some anxiousness as well. For instance, Kay is latched on to me, and then if I walk into a classroom, get a kid without Kay, who's not Kay, and Kay sees me do that, he'll get very anxious and he'll start crying. Okay. All right. So that's the first subtype. 37% of autistic children fall in that category. Those examples, K and C, fall into that category. Moderate challenges. This group shows milder core autism traits and tends to reach developmental milestones on time. They typically do not have co-occurring mental health conditions. So when we talk about co-occurring mental health conditions, ADHD, anxiety, depression, or OCD. So this would be some of the other kids that I've worked with. And it's just not as obvious, their condition. They don't really have that anxiety. This would be the ones, like some of the kids you'll probably walk into out in the world. And you'll say, oh, the baby's just a little socially awkward. But other than that, okay, yeah, that's it. That's it, right? Okay, so 34% of autistic children make up their population. When I did the math on that, that's 71% of the autistic population fall into that category. So I'm wondering where in all of that is cursed behavior, because again, if you're going to call that, a cursed population, if you're going to call that a cursed population, you need to go ahead and just throw in everybody with ADHD, everybody with anxiety, everybody with depression, and everybody with OCD. And we all know at least somebody in one of those categories who has that and does not have autism. And a lot of times we know somebody in our own family. So that means your family cursed. Something to consider. I'm just saying. The other two conditions, mixed ASD with developmental delay. These children experience delays in early milestones, but usually don't show signs of anxiety or depression. There's variation within this group in terms of how social repetitive behaviors appear. And maybe I have one or two kids in this category. And finally, the broadly affected category, which makes up 10%. The other category that I just read makes up 19% of all autistic kids. And the last category, which makes up 10% of all autistic kids. The smallest group faces more severe challenges, including developmental delays, communication difficulties, repetitive behaviors, and mental health conditions such as anxiety and mood disorders. So out of the 10 boys that I see, that I can think of right now off the top of my head that I see, and interestingly, I'll just say in this case, these are all African American boys, and they have autism, right? 1 out of 10 falls in this category, which, if you think about it, adds up to 10%. So I only have one of those kids who I consider severe. All right, so again, I'm still trying to figure out where's the curse here. So we look like we're doing pretty good here. And what was recommended for all of these kids as they age is intervention, like speech language pathology, behavior therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy as needed, right? So if you typically get them the help, you're going to see improvement over time. I mean, that's just what I've noticed. Something else that I want to point out is that while it's so easy to say that the autistic kids, there's this curse. There's going to be this curse on your bloodline and whatnot. Did you know this population gets assaulted and harassed, sexually assaulted, harassed, and violated? They're the group of people that gets it amongst the worst out of people. When compared to people without autism, they get it at a much higher rate. So that's another reason I want to say be careful about how you speak about that population, because then you're just telling the world, especially the people who jumped on the bandwagon of that video and agree with every last word that she said, some of them in their mind going to internalize that autistic people are less valuable, something's wrong with them, and therefore some people are going to go on and treat them less than human. Like they deserve abuse, for instance. Now, I'm not saying she's implying that, but this is why we have to be very careful with our words at all times. Because unfortunately, while there are people with good intentions in the world who have watched this interview, unfortunately, I had to say it, there are people with not so great intentions, I'm certain, who watched the same interview. And they heard that, and something in their spirit, especially if they're possessed by Satan, right? Not saying they're Satan, but they have a satanic possession on them. In the future, they're going to think, if I run into this population, this is the one I'm going to mistreat. It's no different than like when people, like for instance, you hear somebody in school being bullied. I was one of the ones in school bullied. You typically get bullied because you're the other. I was the nerd in school, right? Always doing my work, and I was always the tiniest and youngest looking one. So something about that, the people was just wanting to bully me a lot because I was that outside other. And the more, that smaller group of people did it, the more people, a larger group of people thought it was okay for that to happen to me. It was terrible, yes, but it happened. So this ain't really that much different from that. When people put out that this group is the other group and there's something wrong with them and so different that we can't like, a group of people is going to think it's okay to mistreat them. But indeed, there is research about, them being assaulted and mistreated. So one thing I want to point out from the article entitled "The Extent and Nature of Autistic People's Violence Experiences During Adulthood, a Cross-Sectional Study of Victimization." This is from 2022. It was said there was a high prevalence of abuse amongst men and women, but especially amongst women. So I want you to listen to these stats. For women, and this is in comparison to non-autistic individuals who were studied within this study. Okay, so 59% of the autistic women reported physical abuse. Of these women, 59.6% reported sexual violence. And of these women, 39% reported sexual harassment. And interestingly, which I'm not surprised about, the sexual harassment came from primarily strangers. Note that 39% of these women promoted sexual harassment, and these came primarily from strangers. Now, I can relate to the sexual assault, sexual harassment situation because I myself have faced sexual assault at the hands of 3 different men since 2022, and interesting enough, they were all married. But when I looked up stats, and I wondered, and I was so clueless as to why that was happening, but I looked at some stats and I thought to myself, this makes sense. There's research studies out here that are saying it's related to, I hate to say it, corn addiction to corn. Specifically, on one of the articles I read, and I'm going to put the link in the description, it talks about how a lot of the content includes, in this one case, 94% of aggressive scenes portrayed women as targets of aggression. Furthermore, 96% of sexual and physical aggression scenes portrayed women expressing pleasure when aggressed against. When I kept rolling in my head why these particular men decided it was okay to sexually assault me, right? And this was definitely physical, inappropriate physical, touch. Inappropriate, sexually, like laced, touch. And then accompanied by sexual language. So I knew it was true for the people who were going to say, oh, but it slipped. They slipped their hand or whatever. That's not the case here. Not the case. And no, I did not do anything to provoke them because I don't move in that way. But the most crazy of them, because the one happened in the airport, one happened after a luncheon, and one happened in church. The craziest of them happened in church, and I was most shocked that the man didn't seem at all bothered by the fact that he was doing it publicly in church as dismissal was happening and people was walking right past us. Something in my mind said, what would make him think that was okay? And on top of that, this man is my dad's age. Like, I'm in my late 30s. This man is in his 60s, and I get some people, they like stuff like that, their age gap. Okay, I'm not into that. And on top of that, you married? Absolutely not. So something about this man thought that was totally okay to do in church in front of other church members, and not even thinking about it. So I told myself, I was wondering what was it, and indeed, research is confirming it's coming from an addiction. Yep. So it was said in the studies, when researchers studied 22 different studies about corn and the influence on the viewers, it said consumption among men and the general population, regardless of exposure to violent content, was positively associated with men's sexual aggression perpetration, which included verbal coercion, sexual harassment, and the use of force to obtain sex. So if it happened to me, for instance, and more than likely this came to me from like the fact, like I would say these assaults happened in a matter of like 4 or 5 seconds. These men, when I say they were slick with their movements real fast. I couldn't have even seen it myself. From my point of view, I would say it was like having been sheltered, that I couldn't have known ahead of time that was going to happen. Do I know now and I'm aware of it now? Absolutely. But imagine for the autistic population, who, especially those who are in that realm, I read the 4 subtypes earlier, the ones with the social challenges, they have a harder time picking up social cues. So if I had a hard time dealing with that, and I didn't have autism, and I don't have autism, I can only imagine what it's like for those who do have autism and they can't pick up the social cues. So people recognize when people are not like going to, I guess, necessarily expect that behavior or anticipate that behavior, and therefore guard themselves ahead of time, and they move in that way. But yeah, I can see the correlation with, the corn addiction, right? Yes, and they say for those who are addicted to it, 250%, like the dopamine levels, is above 250%, which is very high, extremely high. And again, I'm gonna put these links to these studies in the link in the description, rather. So all this to say, this population, the autistic population, they're actually high up on the list of receiving abuse, been on the receiving end of abuse. So I don't get how we'll take this population that we don't understand and we'll look at them and say they're a curse. Now, what's a curse is this whole situation that I just read here about these folks who thinking it's okay to go out here and sexually assault, harass people, abuse people, because they're seeing the vulnerability in their victims and taking advantage of it. And for those who are addicted to corn, like, it's like we hear about stuff like that, but we really don't take action about that. I think that's one of the curses on our society. When we hear things about that and know about it, whether it's pertaining to the autistic population or not, and we don't do anything about it, we just go on and say, oh, it's just another day. You know, that's the way it is. I think that's a ongoing curse we're going to have on our society. And unfortunately, as we already know, not only is it affecting, the autistic population, because in this particular study I just read about those autistic individuals, these were adults who were 25 and older, but we already know about kids having, situations happen, and that's like non-autistic and autistic kids who face abuse at the hands sometimes of someone in their family. It could be sexual, physical. We know that. So do you think if we keep sitting here and acting like this is not the true curse here and we don't address that that's going to stop? So we're looking at a whole group of folks that is not even adding to any problems in our society. Conversely, I've seen autistic people be basically geniuses. So it's like, okay, they're going to add good to our society. They're not going to do bad. Obviously, there are going to be some who are going to come up with that bad crowd, but it's because they learn behaviors from negative influences, right? They've just learned from negative influences. Just like people who don't have autism can learn bad traits from their caregivers when they're kids and grow up emulating those same traits. Kids with autism can do the same thing too. So yeah, it's not really different from the general population, like the non-autistic general population doing it. Okay, but on the flip side, what I've noticed in my experience as speech pathologists, they're actually highly intelligent individuals. They're like little geniuses. Okay, extremely high up there in intelligence. So I'm kind of trying to get where the curse is coming in at. And before I conclude, I definitely want to follow up and talk about the issues that the men face. And from that same study I talked about with the women who were 25 and up and they're autistic and face the different types of abuse. So the men, they faced physical violence. 43.8% of them faced physical violence. 40% of them faced sexual violence. And 42.9% of them faced sexual harassment. I find it very interesting how the physical violence and sexual violence for the autistic men, though it's still not a good number. I don't, it shouldn't even be there at all. That percentage should even be up there at that rate. I noticed how it's noticeably lower than what it was for the women. But it was definitely higher for the sexual harassment. And it said in that case for sexual harassment, it was mostly done by their partners, current partners or former partners, which is unfortunate. Okay. So my overall point here is it looks like we're looking at a population that's more vulnerable than anything. And before we get so quick, we're just so ready to fire off and we're making our points and we're so passionate about it, which I don't have an issue with passion because just like, Miss Melissa, she's passionate about talking about her experience in her sorority and how she's denounced and how she's trying to warn other people about, the dangers, right, associated with staying in the sororities. I'm very passionate about working with this population, this autistic population, and making sure they're represented appropriately. Because if someone came out and represented you inappropriately, especially the whole group that you're a part of, that you're considered a part of, you're going to have an issue with that, right? We don't want to promote hatred, disdain, disgust, abuse of another group of folks because we said they were a curse. So we got to be cautious about what we're speaking over other people. And, the biggest twist of all is I find it even in my life that once you find yourself talking this or that over somebody else, the Lord can make it where it happens to you. And again, I'm not looking at autism as a curse, but the way she said is as if it's a curse. It could happen in your family, ma'am, your immediate family. As you just said, it might not be your mom or your grandma. It might be further on your bloodline, okay? It might be one of your kids one day. It might be one of your grandkids one day. It might be one of your great-grandkids one day. And again, I'm not looking at autism as negative. But because you're so busy looking at it as negative, I honestly feel like the Lord humbles us. He had to do that with me actually years before I ever was diagnosed with depression. I had a situation in college where I looked at a fellow roommate, a hallmate in a dorm, and she talked about her depression experience, and me being ignorant about it, thought to myself, oh, she's faking. And I was, quote unquote, as I say, blessed with depression some years later. You better believe I got humbled after that experience, and you better believe I wasn't going to be speaking over nobody else's life like that no more, because I recognize the Lord, the thing that you talking about is a curse, and speaking over negatively related to somebody else, He can bring it right on in your life. But I honestly feel like it's a moment of humbling you, bringing you to a place of humility, and humility ain't never hurt nobody. So me being an advocate, a speech language pathologist, and want to see the best for the babies, I just want to come here and bring that out. And I would love to hear Ms. Blair come back with a retraction on that and acknowledgement that, hey, I made a mistake here. I should have spoken something differently. I should have spoken on those things that even myself had taken the time to do research. And I want to leave you this last thing, according to Karen Eman, the Zip It 40-Day Challenge book that I mentioned earlier. This last point that she made, and I really love this, and I'm going to continue to do this 40-day challenge, and again, I really recommend this to anyone else. So she said, help it heal. Do the words you say and type have restorative qualities? Do they bind wounds and offer a balm of healing? Do you seek to make amends when others have been wronged by what you have said? Make it your goal today to make your interactions with others both health-giving and life-giving. So I hope this has been a blessing to you for all you are watching. I pray that it's giving you some education that you didn't have before, and that you will go on and be encouraged to learn more yourself and reconsider how we view the autistic population, because I think they're awesome and they've been a blessing to my life, and I pray you'll start to see it for yourself. All right, see y'all next time. Bye-bye.